That was the first time I had any social contact with a white person.
White people feel it would really be totally wrong morally for young white girls to be bumping hips in a swimming pool with teenage Negro boys.
I was surprised because the majority of the people picketing were white.
Whose picket line is this?
Guy spit on me.
Spit right in her face. She just looked straight ahead and kept on walking.
It dramatically changed my life.
We'll discuss race and how it plays a factor and how we didn't even talk about this topic because we were afraid.
A Black Executive Perspective.
We are coming to you live from the new BEP studio for another thought-provoking episode of a Black Executive Perspective podcast, a safe space where we discuss all matters regarding race, culture, and those uncomfortable topics that we tend to avoid. I'm your host, Tony Tippett.
And I'm your co-host, Chris P. Reed. We always like to start by recognizing our partners at Code M Magazine. Code M Magazine, whose mission is saving the Black family by first saving the Black man. That is Code M Magazine's 2Ms.com. Check them out, CodeMMagazine.com.
Definitely check them out, and we're excited today. Today we have Alana Trachman, Emmy Award director, producer, joining us to discuss her latest documentary, Ain't No Back to a Merry-Go-Round. The film tells the untold story of when 5 Black students from Howard University took a stand against segregation on a Maryland carousel in 1960. This protest led to a movement that shaped future freedom riders, attracted Nazis, congressmen, and made national headlines. We're going to explore the impact of this grassroots activism, the power of storytelling, and what this forgotten chapter teaches us about resistance today.
Before we get too deep into it, let me talk about Alana Trachman. She is a Emmy Award-winning documentary director and producer. For over 25 years, she has created programs for numerous networks, including PBS, HBO Family, ABC TV, Showtime, Discovery, Lifetime, Sundance, and A Partridge in a Pear Tree. Right? So Alana believes that the true stories, carefully told, have unique power to inspire compassion, action, and community building. Her topics have ranged from a legacy of slavery in Latin America, Black in Latin America with Henry Louis Gates on PBS, to Gulf Coast Shrimpers, Our Heroes Ourselves on Lifetime, Glassblowing for At-Risk Youth, The Arts Advantage on ABC TV, to Transgender Parents, The Pursuit on PBS. Other favorite primetime directing credits include the independent feature Mariachi High, and Texas Ranch House. So Ilana supervised production on PBS History Detectives and Sundance's Big Ideas for a Small Planet. Through her production company, Ruby Pictures, Ilana made the feature documentary Praying with Lior. Lior? Is that how it's pronounced? Lior? Okay, Praying with Lior, which played theatrically in over 60 cities in the United States and abroad. The film garnered 6 audience awards, a Best Documentary, the Grand Prix at the International Disability Film Festival in Moscow, and was critics' pick of the New York Times, New York Magazine, Washington Post, and Philadelphia Inquirer. Wow. Ilana Trachman, welcome to a Black Executive Perspective podcast.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Man, we are extremely excited with all that. That was a mouthful. So Ilana, tell us where you currently reside and where your family is from. I'm sure we'll get into that a little more with, your story, but where are you now?
I'm actually in Philadelphia. I'm in Center City, Philadelphia.
Okay, cool.
All right, awesome. And you've been traveling a lot, my friend. I mean, obviously, this documentary is something that's very exciting, educating people all across the country. I know we chatted earlier. You just had the premiere in New York City. So, and we found you. You did, or maybe one of your people actually was one of the news stations here in Connecticut a few weeks ago. And we were so excited, we reached out to see if you can come on. So you got a busy schedule. Why did you want to come on a Black Executive Perspective podcast to talk about this story?
Well, honestly, like the Black Executive podcast was not on my radar until you guys reached out. And then I mean, I'm interested in anybody that reaches out. And I listened to a bunch of episodes, and I just think that you've an important perspective, an interesting perspective. And with this film in particular, I have my own charge, and I also feel like I've been challenged by various friends in the Black community who say to me, like, get this story in front of as many African Americans as you can. And some of them say, like, why aren't there more African Americans here? You know, what are you doing? And so that's why I'm here.
Well, look, you're at least following orders, okay? So we got to give you that, right? And so, and rightfully so. Your friends who told you that, rightfully so. And that's why we're excited that you're here. So you ready to talk about it and educate everybody, my friend?
I love talking about it.
All right. Well,
Shut me up.
I know you do. All right. So let's talk about it. So what I want to do first, because I want to give everybody just a little sense of what you put together. So I'm going to play a quick little clip so everybody can listen to it. Then we're going to dive in a little bit deeper.
Fun is where you find it.
We're going to have one swing at time at Glen Echo, the amusement park in Washington.
Glen Echo Amusement Park.
This park is segregated. You're not trespassing. May I ask your race? My race, I belong to the human race.
Oh, we were dying to get in there.
I really wanted to ride on the carousel. Why couldn't we go and have fun like everybody else?
We were some bold people.
I knew there was something better for me.
We wouldn't let our kids come to Glen Echo because not everybody could come.
We are Americans too. We support this country. We love this country.
The Holocaust radicalized me.
We fight for civil rights. It's as much my fight as it is theirs.
That was the first time I had any social contact with a white person.
White people feel it would really be totally wrong morally for young white girls to be bumping hips in a swimming pool with teenage Negro boys.
I was surprised because the majority of the people picketing were white.
Whose picket line is this?
Then the brown shirts showed up. I would be picketing while there are these people here whom I fled.
I said, what are you doing here, you nigger? You want to die?
And the guy spit on me.
Spit right in her face. She just looked straight ahead and kept on walking.
Last night's group was the largest number of demonstrators.
Congressman Adam Clayton Powell,
Stokely's first picket line.
A. Philip Randolph, and Roy Wilkins joined the picket line.
Glen Echo gave me my baptism.
It dramatically changed my life.
I mean, so powerful, right? That story. And when, I learned of it and watched your documentary, it blew me away. So the question, every time I hear it, and this is the thing, I watched it again last night and the music and everything. So tell us a little bit, how did you first learn about the Glen Echo protests and what inspired you to make it into a documentary?
Well, Glen Echo Amusement Park closed in 1968. Before I was born. But growing up in the 70s in the area, my house was about 20 minutes away from the national park that was built on the remains of the amusement park. And to this day, that national park looks like the remains of an amusement park, and an old-fashioned one, a 1920s, 1910 kind of Art Deco infrastructure. It's beautiful. And they still have the neon signs for the Cuddle Up and Bumper Car Pavilion and the shooting gallery. And when I was a kid, there was even more left, like roller coaster tracks. And it was just this super evocative place. It was almost like you could feel the ghosts in the air of so many hundreds of thousands of people who had gone there for fun, for wholesome fun, let's say, or how it seemed to me. And there were pictures actually all around the park. It was one of these places that the National Park Park Service put up their displays, talking about the history and when it had been built and when different rides came. And I used to love to stare at those pictures and imagine those days. And it wasn't until, I don't know, probably 2 decades at least later, that I was back at the park thinking about it as a wedding venue. And my fiance and I ran into a park ranger, and I don't even know why, but he told us the story about first that the park had been whites only and how it had become integrated. And I was so shocked that the park had been whites only. I mean, I shouldn't have been, right? But I was so shocked at myself that I'd been coming to this place my whole childhood, had looked at these pictures, and had just never registered that I was only looking at pictures of white people. And growing up in the area, I knew that there were Black communities, predominantly Black communities. So I needed to have then did the math to figure out, well, that means if I'm looking at only white people, that means that there are whole communities of people who are not coming in here, who are not part of this wholesome fun, so to speak. And that was a really shameful wake-up call to me. When I learned about the really unusual, the unprecedented collaboration that took place on that picket line between Howard University students and the first time a community en masse organized, a white community, to support a Black student protest, and who those people in the community were. Those were a neighborhood of predominantly Jewish labor organizer, civil servant types. That was who my father was. And he had passed a couple years earlier. And so I just felt this like kinship. I just felt this like desire to delve into this world and meet these people and maybe understand my dad even a little better.
You were guided by a higher power, in my impression, in my interpretation, by the things that I've read. I don't want to put anything on you, but it seemed like everything that you were doing just had some type of, although it was a labor of love and it was an extensive labor of love. You talk about the time that it took for this to be produced. But before we get into that time frame, tell us the inspiration behind the title of the documentary, because I think that is just another little nugget. Like, you have so many little nuggets that if you overlook it, it's kind of like the picture where you step back and then it turns into something. You're like, oh my God, that's a bridge, type of deal. But tell us about the title of the film.
Well, Langston Hughes wrote this beautiful poem in 1942 called Merry-Go-Round. And it's in the voice of a child who's African American, who's coming up from the South. And he says to the carousel driver, down south where I come from, Blacks have to sit in the back. So where's the back to the merry-go-round? Where's my horse? He says, because there ain't no back to a merry-go-round. So it's a direct lift from the Langston Hughes poem.
Right,
Beautiful.
Right. What you told the story through the eyes of the people that were there, right? And I think there was only 5 or 6 of them that's still living today, at least that you could be able to track down, right? A little more?
No,
yeah.
There's probably more than 100 that are still alive, because there are people there that were babies. There were people in strollers. But in terms of like the original protesters, yeah, there's definitely like several handfuls. They're in their 80s mostly now.
Right, right.
Howard students are in their 80s, and the people who live in the neighborhood who were there are very few who are still alive, and the one who is featured in the film, she just turned 101.
Correct. And so that's what I was meaning. I'm talking about through the 4 or 5 people that were in the film.
Yes.
Helena, Hank, Dion, I forget the other, right?
Esther.
So how was it, Esther, thank you. So how was it working with them and hearing their firsthand accounts, especially since, like you said, you grew up not too far from there. You didn't recognize what had happened until you talked to the park ranger. And then now you said, I'm inspired, I want to do something. And then you're hearing these people's firsthand accounts.
I mean, it was fascinating. I mean, in a way, it was like finding out something about my family that, it was like finding it. I don't know if it's fair to say. I mean, it's not quite like finding out that your family has a dirty secret, but it was finding out certainly that my city, my county had a dirty secret. And And in terms of speaking to the people, I mean, I was just always struck by, there's so many things. I mean, I could go on in so many directions with this, but, you know, I was struck by how relatable they were, by how just ordinary, and I don't mean that in a denigrating way. I just mean like they weren't famous, you know, they weren't Martin Luther King, they weren't John Lewis, they weren't Diane Nash. You know, these were people who just in their neighborhood at their amusement park, which had its swimming pool, you know, their carousel, there was something wrong. And for the white people that were involved, it was like, it was staring them in the face. I mean, they lived across the street, right? So the fact of it was an obvious thing that they had to get up and do. And for the Black community, they were charged. I mean, they got it's like they got the torch from Greensboro. That just lit a match in February of 1960 and at Black schools all over the country. And so Howard was no different. And Howard students originally started protesting at in Arlington, at lunch counters in Arlington. And when they were successful ridiculously quickly, within 2 weeks, then they looked for another target. But, you know, these were college students. Now, I don't want to underestimate. I mean, these college students, on the one hand, they were regular, but on the other hand, they were unusual among college students.
Very mature.
Right. Well, not just mature. I mean, the vast majority of kids at Howard did not go to these protests. There were thousands of kids at Howard who did not go to these protests. There was a few. We're talking like 10, 12. And the vast majority of white people had nothing whatsoever to do with this. But this neighborhood, as a neighborhood, wholeheartedly participated. So that just struck me that these are regular people, and that, you know, those of us who think of ourselves as activists, you know, we go to a protest maybe a couple times a year. Maybe we sign a bunch of internet petitions, and that's where our activism career begins and ends. But these people were on the picket line every single day for 10 weeks. I mean, we're talking 70 days in the summer, you know, where kids could have been playing baseball. Families had other things to do, but this was important. So this is what those families did. They showed up with strollers. They showed up with picnics and lemonade and cookies. And, you know, it was a kind of commitment and just dedication to a higher cause that you don't see very often today about much.
It's time to rethink your protein. AgileLab's protein bars are crafted with high-quality protein, double the leucine, and enriched branched-chain amino acids, essential for optimal muscle recovery. Finally, a protein bar that works as hard as you do. So visit agilelabs.com and use the code BEP to get 20% off. That's agilelabs.com, promo code BEP.
Let me speak on your dedication to a higher cause as a filmmaker, because you spent 10 years plus putting this together with no to limited budget, right? So when we talk about dedication, that takes a lot of dedication. And there's many stories that go throughout, and I'm sure the behind the scenes, you know, type of things that'll come in the future. But tell us specifically about Sam Smith and Polly and that intersection and why that was just another reinforcement that you're on the right path. You're fighting the good fight. Give us that.
That's a great story. And it might be one of my favorite. So when I first started working on the film, you know, my job was to find out everything that there was to know. And so that meant talking to everyone that I could possibly find who had been there, whose parents were there, anybody that was connected to it that was going to have some angle, you know, to tell me. And there's probably about 150 people that we tracked down, which is a whole nother story about tracking people down. So one of these people that I spoke to was a woman whose name is Polly Muntz-Talon, who had been about 7 on the picket line. And, you know, she told me her perspective. Her parents had been very involved. And many years later, like maybe 3 years later or so, she, thank God, had kept my phone number. And she called me up and she said, hey, you know, I have this box that had been in my parents' basement, And at the bottom of it, there's a little yellow Kodachrome box that says Glen Echo 1960. Do you want it? So I said, sure, of course. Now, I left out something important, which is that I was working on this film without having any moving footage of the protests. I had some stills, and I had an audio recording. And that recording was by a reporter named Sam Smith, who had been summoned, let's say, by the Howard students who were really smart in those days, as people are today, about how to use press. And the Howard students invited Sam to come. So Sam was recording during that exchange that you hear in the trailer, where the police officer says to Lawrence Henry, "Can I ask your race?" And he said, "I'm a member of the human race." And he just spells out who is in and who is out. And even then, that was so overt and so kind of shocking, even in 1960, that Sam Smith saved that recording. And he didn't tape over it the way you normally did, because tape was expensive. So Sam held on to it for many, many years. And then when the park became a national park, he donated that piece of tape. So they shared it with me. So I had that, and I had stills, and I had no moving footage. So fast forward a couple years after talking to Polly, she calls me up. She tells me she's got this little box. I didn't have any money to get it transferred, and especially, I had no idea what was on it. It could have, for all I knew, it could have just been like, I don't know, pictures of a birthday party that was there, images of a birthday party that was there. So before I could even make any personal commitment, I needed to have a sense of what was on it. So I bought a $35 Super 8 movie projector on eBay. And I watched those YouTube videos of somebody who very patiently shows you how to use it. And I was in my office, which is the third floor of my house, with all the lights off, and, on the wall, I projected it. And on the first frame, it was really clear from that first frame, it's the protest. It is the protest. And I just fell on the floor. I jumped up, realizing, oh my God, maybe I loaded this wrong. This could blow up, this film could catch fire. So I turned it off and sent it to Color Lab with my credit card. And, what came back was 90 seconds of incredible footage that nobody had ever seen before. And that proved, who was there, what happened, and that this really was this organized interracial civil rights protest. So that was beautiful. That was wonderful. But it wasn't until about 5 years after that I was in the edit room. And now, this protest, like I said, took 10 weeks. So that's about 70 days. And it wasn't until we were in the edit room that we discovered that Polly Talon's dad, with his Super 8 camera, was filming at the exact same moment that conversation between Lawrence Henry and the police officer was taking place. And he got it. He captured that moment, and it synced. So the sound that we had actually matched up that footage. And these two things had been separate for 60-something years, 3,000 miles from each other, and, would have never been connected except for incredible luck.
That is, well, number one, that shows you it was meant to be in terms of you being able to find it and be able to promote the movie. One of the things that blew me away is the Jewish community and the Howard students that came together, right? And in the movie, one of the gentlemen says, "I never had interacted with a white person until this, this situation," right? And so showing a Jewish community that, at the end of the day, they could go to the park, okay? They had the access, okay? And then you tell the story. And the other thing, though, too, about it is about the African-American community that also lived in the neighborhood. A lot of them was not involved in the protests because they were like, we don't care about an amusement park. We care about jobs. So there was a lot of different, little nuances, a microcosm of the world. But at the end of the day, for this to happen, you had to have people come together, all right, who at that time was very, how should I say, was an anomaly. Okay. And talk a little bit about when you found out about the Jewish neighborhood and the Howard students coming together, and not just coming together to protest, but eventually becoming friends and spending time, which was very unique in the early 1960s.
Well, I can't say I was surprised that people in this particular Jewish community were sympathetic, because, that was my dad. And, and I grew up with that. I grew up, he told us about being at the March on Washington. It was one of the most powerful days of his life. And he actually worked for the African American Labor Center, which was a division of the AFL-CIO. He was the deputy director. So, that people felt that way wasn't surprising to me. What was surprising to me, and this is just about my own ignorance, was the degree to which Washington, D.C. was like the South. You kind of think Washington, D.C. is like so enlightened and it's the capital, but really Washington, D.C. is below the Mason-Dixon line, and it behaved that way. So just the kind of things that we associate with Deep South was actually happening right there in Washington. It surprised me that it actually was completely within reason for somebody to go their entire life, an educated person, a liberal person, to go their entire life and never have a meaningful interaction with somebody who is a different race. There's a moment in the film where Helene Wilson, who is Jewish, was on the picket line, and she talks about being introduced to a Howard student named Hank Thomas. And when he puts his hand out to shake her hand, his hand is shaking. So she doesn't think really that much of it. She notices it, shakes his hand, and then afterwards, her friend says to her, "You were the first white woman's hands he had ever shaken." So, that kind of separation, because I think the world is still really segregated, but that degree is something that's very hard to contemplate. It's just not in our experience. So, so that also was a real surprise for me.
I think from a historical perspective, I understand where we were as a country at that time. We were still feeling the effects of the war. The war had just come off. And so some of the Jewish sentiment, you talked about unionized people and things of that nature. So there was a sense of camaraderie for the downtrodden or the people who had been affected or marginalized to a degree. But in the idea of them all coming together at that time, talk about some of the historical markers that you discovered as it related to the American Neo-Nazi Party. And that was their first foray, publicly and things of that nature.
Yeah. So this is 1960, right? It's 15 years after the war. And the American Nazi Party was fledgling. It was started by a man named George Lincoln Rockwell, who, modeled himself on Hitler. And he had a group of mostly men, youngish men, who he referred to as his stormtroopers. And they subscribed to the ideals of Nazism, and they wore swastikas, and fascism in general was their god. And they were showing up places. They were protesting various things, but they had never counter-protested anything before. And so when the newspapers covered that Glen Echo Park, which was, I can't tell you how important this was for white Washington. Like, people used to get engaged on the Ferris wheel. There still is a huge Spanish ballroom, and Tommy Dorsey would be performing from the ballroom, and all the radio stations were broadcasting what was going on in that ballroom, right? So the idea that this park may someday be open to African Americans was so repulsive to the American Nazi Party that they showed up from Arlington, which is like, it's a drive to get out there, in order to counter protest. And for the Jewish community, which also, one thing I've really learned from this is that nobody is monolithic. Nobody's all the same. So I can't even call this the Jewish community.
Right.
Bannockburn was founded originally by Jewish people who had come to Washington in order to work in the New Deal administration. And they couldn't buy housing in lots of parts of Washington because there were covenants against selling to Jews. So cooperatively, they bought a big tract of land and they were started building houses on it. Once those houses were built, plenty of people who moved in who were not white, who were not Jewish, but they were the certain kind of people that were comfortable living among Jews. So there was, Quakers and Catholics. And so that community had felt the effects of the Holocaust. There was plenty of people in the community who had lost people, or who had family members who had died in the camps. And they obviously had felt the effects of discrimination. And when you see in the film the American Nazi Party signs, they completely conflate the Black and Jewish community. They are similarly hated.
Yes. Yes.
It's on the same sign.
Yes,
they are
yes.
ridiculing and saying vile things about both. And actually, I mean, that's something that I think about all the time in terms of racism and anti-Semitism, because if they come for one of us, they're coming for all of us.
That's just the bottom line.
Absolutely.
That's the bottom line. You're 100% right.
Absolutely.
Some of the Glen Echo protesters became freedom riders.
That's right.
Right? Stokely Carmichael was one of them. So talk a little bit about the bridge between the protests and the broader freedom rider movement, because, as you stated earlier, these were Howard students. This was like one of the first, and obviously we had the things that happened in Montgomery and Selma and stuff to that nature years earlier. But in terms of freedom riders, talk a little bit about how this bridged the gap and took it from one level to the next.
Yeah. So, that's a great question. 10 of the original 1961 Freedom Riders came out of that protest. They were like incubated, I would say.
Insane.
That picket line, and trained, and trained by these union organizer types in the Bannockburn community. It was almost, there's like an unofficial tutelage going on, mentorship, I would say, because the Bannockburn community knew union tactics, and the Howard students had their own tactics, but they were informing each other, and it couldn't have happened without each other.
And just to be fair, too, the Howard students did they were doing the breakfast the counter stuff, right?
Yep.
And they were able to desegregate a few restaurants, right? So
Many.
that was many of them, right? And that was their start in terms of doing protests and stuff to that nature.
Absolutely. I'm just talking about like strategies.
Gotcha.
So the labor, there was just strategies about how you stage a protest, how you write editorials, but the Howard students were bringing Martin Luther King and Gandhi philosophy.
Principles. Yeah.
I mean, you see in the film instructions for how one is supposed to picket, and the students had to be in suits and the women had to be in dresses, and that whole notion of like showing up as respectable people, that's out of the King approach. I just forgot what your question was.
No, the bridging the gap between Glen Echo and the Freedom Riders, right?
Thanks for reminding me, because it's such a good question. So after these people had established themselves, I think a few things happened. Number one, all kinds of people who had been together on that picket line, teenagers who were in Bannockburn, or Black students who weren't part of Howard, but who were, in the neighborhoods, they all, commingled, and they inspired each other. And so these people then, when they went off in their lives, they went off to college campuses around the country, or their ministries, or wherever, but they went off having had the experience of knowing each other. And the necessary group effort, the understanding and value of the group effort was something that they were carrying with them, from then on. And the sense of partnership, that we're in it together. So like I said, 10 Freedom Riders, Black and white, came out of that protest. And some of them, like two of the people who are featured in the film, Dion Diamond and Hank Thomas, stayed in the South and went, did voter registration, worked with King, were giants to people who study this. Yeah.
I think one of the things, especially at this time in our country, that kept jumping into my mind as I was watching and researching was the level of diversity, right? The level of diversity, which is now, such a bad thing, but you really highlight the common man's civil activism. It wasn't just the splashy names and the people who, it was the women and men that we hadn't heard, the unsung heroes, the unknown soldiers that you happened to capture in essence of where they were and what they were believing and what they were fighting for. And they didn't think at the time, this is world changing or whatever. This is one thing that we can affect. And they put their all into it. So you capturing that, and as you're going through, and I know one of the things that you were excited about was the diversity that you brought to the situation. So tell us more about Sandra and her role.
You did your homework, man. You really I'm so impressed. Well, so I had the great fortune of working with the editor Sandra Christie on this film, and Sandra's a legend. She has worked on so many civil rights films. She started out her career with Eyes on the Prize, and so I was just thrilled that she saw the power of this movie, that she that she was in it with me, and Sandra and I, in the simplest terms, reflect the picket line. I'm a white Jewish girl. She's an African American woman, and
I love it.
And that is really important. That was really important to the storytelling because there were all kinds of nuances that we each understood about our people, quote unquote, that we didn't necessarily know about the other.
Right.
And so that informed every single decision, all kinds of things. And man, I mean, if it's a good movie, it's because there was this dialogue. I mean, and Sandra and I love each other. We definitely argued about things, but I mean, she's one of my favorite people in the whole world. I hope she feels the same about me. But and I just saw her yesterday. But yeah, I mean, can I give an example about that?
Yeah, please.
Just
give us some.
I love how you lit up. I love how you lit up.
Plus,
that was powerful.
You said something that was very key, though, too, right? Is that at the end of the day, when you work with somebody, you could be your best friend, whatever the case may be, there's not always going to be agreement. Everybody brings different nuances and different things. Right. And that's what makes things special, right? Is being able to work together. So definitely give us some examples.
And also, and I want to add to that, and being humble before the differences.
Correct.
Like going into it, with this idea, like there are going to be things that that I don't know, and like bring it on, So we had an excellent composer. His name is Adam Dorn, and Adam is Jewish. His father was one of the leading R&B record producers in the 60s and 70s and 80s. So he's really like steeped, I would say, in Black music. I think that comes more naturally to him than anything else. But anyway, so Adam wrote beautiful music cues for the film. And we were looking at a section where, each of the four featured characters tells a single story about a formative moment in their lives that just helps you, the viewer, understand where they were coming from and why they were one of the unusual people who showed up to picket, just like their background story. And so Dion tells a story about growing up in Petersburg, Virginia, which was completely segregated, and being a geeky intellectual kid and going to the library, and the library having a colored entrance around the back, and the main entrance and the stacks were for white people. And of course, like the books that he wanted were in the stacks. And so he used to go in and sneak into the stacks so he could read his books. And he would just hang out there until they called the police, and then he would run out of there. And so he tells the story almost just mischievously, and like in his voice is like kind of like Yeah, he's excited telling it like he got away with something, right? And that's how he's talking about it. And so Adam wrote a cue that matched Dion's tone, of that sort of like triumph, that sort of like, look what I got away with. So we're looking at it with the cue, and Sandra was like, no. She's like, this is wrong. She's like, are you kidding me? Like a little black boy in the South sneaking into the stacks, getting caught and having police come after him. I don't care the way he tells the story now. He would have been scared. He would have been scared, right? And the music needed to reflect that.
Right.
Like, of course. Right. And so Adam and I were just carried, we were just carried away with the way Dion told the story and the tone of Dion's voice as he told the story. We weren't thinking about what that story actually would have felt like. It's just, it wasn't in our lived experience. And so, of course we changed the cue in order to reflect that. So, I mean, that's just like one example.
Yeah, that is awesome. I love it. Plus you were able to talk a little bit about some of the voiceovers of people, Jeffrey Wright, Mandy Patinkin, and other celebrity actors. Yeah, thank you. Tell us how you chose them. What unique nuances did they bring to the storytelling?
So the documentary business is miserable. It's a terrible
so you
business
needed some
model.
Excitement, huh?
It makes no sense. There's no reason. It makes no financial sense. It really doesn't. And lots and lots and lots of great documentaries are made every year and are never seen because there's just so many of them and because they don't really bring in money. So, you need whatever you can in order to stand out and to make it to the top of the pile, when festivals are looking at you. And so I purposely have no narrator in the film. There's no kind of like outside intelligence, and all of the objective exposition is coming from what was published at the time, both in the black press and in the white press, and letters to the editor and things like that. And so to bring those pieces to life, I needed them to be voiced. So I went after celebrity talent. And so Mandy Patinkin does the voice of the white press, and Jeffrey Wright does the voice of the African-American press. And letters to the editor are read by various fantastic actors. There's Dominique Thorne and Bob
Lee
Ballard.
Grant. I think Lee Grant. Yeah.
Yep. Lee Grant and Tracy Toms. And I'm Peter Gallagher. I know I'm missing somebody. Alicia Reiner. And also I was just so interested in using whatever kind of primary source material I could find. And so even like manifestos that were written by the Howard University students, I have the typewritten sheets, but Dominique Thorne reads them. So, yeah.
You talked about this being a 10-year odyssey. And so while you were doing this, so many things in the landscape changed, perceptions and feelings and emotions and laws and things like that. You had the CRT, the critical race theories, and how you weren't supposed to be highlighting and illuminating these things of camaraderie and support amongst blacks and whites a long time ago. You're supposed to be whitewashing the history. And so as a documentarian, as a filmmaker, how daunting is that for you guys to tell these stories, considering that they may not ever make it because they're doing a modern day book burning?
I mean, first of all, I think a good story is a good story, and that's just timeless, right? And that's just, what we call evergreen. I do think that the way a story is going to be received is going to keep changing based on what's going on in the contemporary moment. I don't think, sadly, I really don't think that race is going away anytime soon. So I think us as a country, us grappling with this issue is going to go on forever. Maybe, hopefully not forever, but for a really long time. And so I think in that sense, it's going to be relevant, but the meaning in the moment is going to keep changing. So when I started making the film, Obama was president, and I thought I was making a film that was going to be sort of like a straight line of redemption, from this beautiful interracial protest all the way to the White House, and that we would just all continue on this incredible upward slope.
Right.
But and then when other things happened, when we got different people in power.
You got a tipping point, right? It started rolling back.
Yeah, well, it's you. Then the film is about look where we've come from and look how dangerous it is to slip back there. This is where we could go, right? And then when Biden was president, and I live in Philadelphia, which personally, like we took credit for that win because there was so many boots on the ground. Then I felt like the film was highlighting the importance of just real, true grassroots mobilization, right? And then here we are again, and here we are in a place where I really hope that people teach the civil rights movement. I don't know what's going to happen, but I also feel I've got like a fire under my butt to get this film into like a classroom ready version, which can't be an hour and a half, so that schools can use it. Any school that feels is willing to do it, I want them to be able to have it as a tool.
Right. Listen, to be honest, there's so much. I've always tried to stay on top of history and all the things that have happened throughout the United States, around the world. However, you've proved here that there's so many stories that we don't know about, right? That need to come to light, all right? That can, regardless of the circumstances that we live in now, can still provide a lesson to individuals in terms of people coming together, or more importantly, why it's not important to erase history, or why it is important to understand our history. Your movie provides a lot of little nuggets out of that, right? Which is key to this. And that's one of the reasons why we're excited to have you on. And I'm glad you endured the 10 years to be able to do it, okay? But if we can jettison to today, right? Because we talked about in the 60s, the protest, and it was about trying to erase second-class citizenship. It was about, the 14th Amendment and all the things, due process, and all the things that are promised to all Americans in the United States that African-American people were not getting access to, right? And you just talked about, as Chris pointed out in his question, we're now in 2025, and people are trying to roll things back, right? And we don't see the activism today as we've seen 65 years ago. And I would love to hear your point of view on why you think that is. And then more importantly, the people that were in the 50s and 60s, right, that took a bullet or lost their house or they couldn't vote or a million things that we have access to today. Can you speak a little bit? Are people different today? Are they just indifferent? What's the difference? Because we still need that activism, right? But people are not activated.
If you like what you hear and want to join us on this journey of making uncomfortable conversations comfortable, please subscribe to a Black Executive Perspective podcast on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Hit subscribe now to stay connected for more episodes that challenge, inspire, and lead the change.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that is such a great question. That's a really important question. And I'm not sure that I know the answer. It seems like we have just as much to be mad about. Or more. Well, maybe not more. I don't know. Have we become complacent? Have enough people arrived, at a level of comfort? I'm really not sure. But I will say that this relatively recent phenomenon of identity politics is not doing anyone any favors. Because I always think about the fact that in 1960, in a privately owned amusement park, it was illegal for a Black and white child to be in the same swimming pool together at the same time.
That held 3,000 people.
Right.
The swimming pool was huge. It wasn't a small pool.
Yeah.
3,000 people, right. Yet, these people on this picket line every single day were able to get past all that and have long, endless conversations that led to really deep understandings of each other, appreciation of each other, knowing each other, and actually relationships that endure to this day. And yet, so today, we can all swim in the same swimming pool, but it's really hard to have these conversations because of identity politics, and also assumptions, both, that, well, you stand over there in that camp. And so that means I can't talk to you because I'm in this camp. And I also believe if you're under that umbrella, then I think I know everything that you think and I hate it all. Right. And so, another thing that I hope that people take from the film is that all of these groups contain lots and lots and lots of individuals. And, when people say the Jewish community, well, yeah, the Jewish community, there were Jews in this film who were the owners of the park, who were upholding segregation. Right. Or when people say, the Black community, okay, and there were people who were Black from Howard University who were protesting, and there were people who absolutely would never in a million years risk that kind of thing.
Correct.
So, I think anytime anyone says they did this or they think that or they whatever, just so lazy to me. And I hope we can poke at it some more and feel compelled to say, well, who's they? And is that really everyone? Or, all the Jews? Or, I certainly... I've heard African Americans say anytime, there's a horrible crime committed and it was a Black person who did it, they just, it's this feeling of crap, how does that reflect on all of us? And I feel the same way about, Jeffrey Epstein, Bernie Madoff, whatever. Those are not all Jews.
Correct. They paint a broad brush. There's no question, right? No question. Right. As we get ready to close, I want to throw one thing at you because I love this. Obviously, in the movie, you show how those individuals are today, right? Those 4 individuals that you focus on in the movie, right? And so I want to play this quick little clip from Hank because I thought that was just so poignant in terms of what he said.
There was an amusement park outside of Washington that would not admit Blacks. This little community, primarily American Jews, started picketing. American Jews were our most important allies in the civil rights movement. Jews decided that they were going to march with us, sit in with us, and a few of them died with us. So, whenever you hear anyone, especially a person of color, say anything resembling anti-Semitism, I want you to tell them that they are talking about our most important allies.
So you can see the effect of, that he still had as he was talking to, I believe it was a class in that clip, right? What's your thoughts on that?
I think that Hank is brave in that he is expressing his true feelings, and that there are plenty of people in his community who would not agree with him. I think he is speaking from his own lived experience, and he is telling the truth to, he's actually speaking to a lot of students who are at the King Center, at the Martin Luther King Center in Atlanta. I would really rather hear your thoughts on it.
Well, you know what? I can tell you mine real simple. I loved it, and I'll tell you why. It's because you just got finished saying it. Look at where we are today. Okay? Identity politics is horrible. And this story, which we want everyone to go out and see, is that nothing changes unless not one group, but multiple groups come together who may not know each other, who may live on the other side of the fence, but they believe the right thing. They didn't let their fear stop them, okay, or what their neighbors may say of them. They believe the right thing, that every human being has the right to access or go to a certain school or live in a neighborhood. And this just happened to be an amusement park, okay? So what I thought he said, and I enjoyed that, I thought it was perfect. Yes, I don't get caught up in what a bunch of other people may not agree on, okay? Because we'd be here all day long, okay? But he's saying what his experience and his facts. And yes, the owners of the amusement park was Jewish. Okay, but there was black people that wasn't doing nothing either. All right? So at the end of the day, when you're in the war and you're in the foxhole and bullets and bombs are falling around you, and you look to your left and your right and you see who's in the foxhole with you, and they stayed in the foxhole and they continue with the freedom ride and stuff to that nature. Not everybody, some of them. Guess what? I think that was great for him to say, and I appreciate it. And that's how we should be looking at all our brothers and sisters.
So we definitely want to extend a warm, hearty thank you for you providing your time and your talent and your vision. And we hope to see more things on your docket of accomplishments, because you're such a young woman that has so much ahead of you. But this is just one of those things that will really put you on my map. I'll say that.
There's no question.
Unfortunately,
There's no question.
It put you on my map. And I was just like, wow, this is so powerful. And it's not just the fact that it's reinforced the vision, and the imagery was reinforced by the dedication once I knew more after the fact. And so this really, just helps to understand how it takes someone to give a damn and actually put something towards the change that they want to see. And you exemplified that. So we thank you. And we hope that our audience sees it the same way.
Thank you. I'm so touched by that, and it's such an honor, honestly, to be talking with you. Can I just put out there that if people want to find out where the film is showing in their community,
Absolutely.
They can go to ain'tnoback.com. They can actually see the trailer there, and there's a page that lists all the screenings that are all over the country.
Yeah,
and we'll list that. We'll list that.
That's what we're going to ask you. How can BEP help you? Okay, so great, and we're going to promote this. It's Black History Month. This will come out. So we want as many people to see it. We want people to go wherever and share it. It's a great story. It's something that everybody, like I said, should watch. But there's so many learning lessons out of it, and that you can apply today. So again, Alana Trochman, we want to thank you for appearing on a Black Executive Perspective podcast. We want you to stay right there because you're going to help us with our call to action. Okay? So I think it's now time for
Tony's Tidbit.
Okay, and the tidbit today. History is shaped by those who refuse to be overlooked. Justice isn't only about laws. It is also about the stories we keep alive. True change happens when justice is a collective fight. The past is calling. Will we answer? And you heard a lot of that today from our guest, Alana Trochman. So we again want to thank her.
Absolutely. And at this time in our program, we want to remind you that we have a plethora of opportunities and options for you to join the Black Executive Perspective podcast family. One of those things is Need to Know with Nsinga. Need to Know with Dr. Nsinga Burton is a weekly segment that we have on a Black Executive Perspective podcast where Dr. Burton dives into crucial and timely topics that shape our community. She is so powerful, so innovative, so educated. You don't want to miss her depiction of what's going on around us.
Absolutely. And you don't want to miss our next episode of Pull Up, Speak Up, where our roundtable will tackle the most hard-hitting, provocative topics of today, bold, unfiltered, unapologetic, and every voice at the table matters. All right? So it's going to challenge your beliefs. It's going to ignite your mind. This is not just talk. It's a call to action. So definitely you want to tune in and be a part of the revolution.
And our primary call to action that encompasses everything we do here is to remember that you incorporate less, L-E-S-S. Our goal is to eliminate all forms of discrimination, and to achieve this, we are asking everyone to embrace L-E-S-S. Alana, kick us off with this.
Well, the L stands for learn. Educate yourself on racial and cultural nuances, and be open to things that you just may not know.
Absolutely. And so, and after you learn, then you have the letter E, which stands for empathy, right? Now, since you've broadened your horizons, now you understand what your friends and colleagues are going through because you understand their points of view.
The first S stands for share. Share your insights and enlighten others. This is a multi-award winning documentary. Enlightened me significantly, and it helped me to empathize and learn. So please continue to share. This is one thing you can share, but there are a multitude of things we'll provide and continue to provide to help you share.
Absolutely. And the final S stands for stop, right? We want to stop discrimination as it walks in our path. So if Uncle Joe says something at the Sunday dinner table that's inappropriate, you say, Uncle Joe, we don't believe that, we don't say that, and you stop it right there. So if everyone can incorporate less, LESS will build a more fairer and more understanding world. And more importantly, we all will be able to see the change that we want to see because less will become more.
We want to remind you and invite you to tune in to future episodes and please review past episodes. And one of the things that we intensely try to highlight is this is for everyone. Although the name is a Black Executive Perspective, we look at every perspective from every angle that we can to help everyone collectively. So please go to the website, sign up for the newsletter, rate us, review us, subscribe. Tell us what you'd like to hear about, and we'll try to bring it to you. Tony, where can they find us?
Chris, man, you can find the Black Executive Perspective podcast on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can follow us on our socials of TikTok, X, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram at A Black Exec. For our fabulous guests, Alana Trochman, the director and producer of Ain't No Back to a Merry-Go-Round. We thank her for being here. For the co-host with the most, my man in Dallas, Texas, Chris B. Reed. I'm Tony Tidbit. We talked about it. We learned a lot about it today. We love you, and now we're out.
A Black Executive Perspective.